Hello Year 9, today we're going to be building on our understanding of what the suffragists and suffragettes did and how women won the vote by looking at women's work during the First World War. So the first thing I'd like you to do, please, is just to have a reflection really and think about what you think the impact of World War I would be on life in Britain. So think about the fact that all those men are going off to war. How would that impact then on life at home? What would that mean? Okay, so the first thing we're going to do today is to have a look at some key words. So these three key words are going to come up in your work today. The first one is conscription, the second one is munitions, and the third is trade unions. So conscription we've come across before. It's the idea that the government forced people or required people to join the army. That happened from 1916 onwards, and they did that rather than relying on people volunteering. Munitions are things that are needed for war, such as shells, bullets, guns, and uniforms. So munitions factories make things that are needed for war. And finally, trade unions are organisations of workers. So trade unions exist in lots of different professions. So teachers have trade unions, nurses have trade unions, lots of building companies and things like that have trade unions. And they're all aimed at defending their workers' interests, and they also do things like negotiating better pay. So if you can make sure that you've got these key words written down, so pause here, complete that task, and then come back. So your next task today is to read through the information sheet that you've been given and to follow and to complete the following tasks. So you've got one on this page and one on the next. So the information sheet that you're looking at is this one here. So it says Women, War Work and the Franchise. The franchise is just another way of saying suffrage or the right to vote. So the first question I would like you to answer is, what do you think were the most difficult problems faced by women doing war work? So I want you to use at least two of the sources that are in the information that you're given to be able to back up your opinion. And I've got a sentence starter here that you can use if you want to, but you don't have to. So pause here, complete that task, and then come back in a moment. There is a challenge task if you'd like to stretch yourself. So your next task is, again using that information sheet, I would like you to imagine that you are a suffragette. And I would like you to write an account for your local newspaper explaining how your life has changed by the year 1915. So I've got some success criteria for you here to be able to complete that task. Firstly, you need to make sure that you give information about your life before 1915. So what sorts of things were suffragettes doing before 1915 came along? I'd like you to think about what sorts of things you were doing after 1915 to contribute to the war effort. Try and use sources A, C and E within your work, plus any others. I'd like you to describe any problems that you faced. And also then, I'd like you to consider how that might impact public opinion on whether or not women should have the right to vote. So think about the kinds of things that the women are doing. Think about the way that suffragettes have changed their behaviour to help contribute to the war effort. How might that impact on women's right to vote? So complete that task, and then I've got one final thing to go through with you. Okay, hopefully you have paused and completed, and now you've come back for the final part of the lesson, which is to look at the Representation of the People Act, which was passed in 1918. So on the 6th of February 1918, the Representation of the People Act became law. And what that did was it gave the vote to all men over the age of 21. Now that bit's interesting. Basically, the reason why they had to do this here is because lots of the soldiers who had gone away to fight in the war had actually lost the right to vote, because at the time the law said that if you're away from England for more than 6 months, you were no longer allowed to vote, which meant that all these soldiers returning from war did not have the right to vote for their country. This also gave the government the opportunity to be able to slip in the vote for women. So the Representation of the People Act also gave the vote to women over the age of 30 who owned property, or those over the age of 30 who were married to men who owned property. I want you, as your final task today, to have a real think about those terms, and I want you to answer the question of whether or not you think this was equality for women. So once you're finished, submit your work to your teacher either via Satchel 1 or by emailing them, and make sure if you've got any questions that you message your teacher through Satchel 1. Good luck!